The instant I crossed that ornate threshold, I recognized I had either made the wisest choice of my existence or committed the gravest error conceivable. Cordelia Ashworth's expression contorted into something suspended between a grin and a wince, as though she had just tasted something sour while attempting to appear pleasant for a portrait. Her gaze descended along my understated sapphire dress, my practical low-heeled shoes, my inexpensive earrings purchased from a chain store, and I observed her mentally tallying my financial standing and determining me worthless. She inclined toward her son, my intended husband Brennan, and murmured something she assumed I could not detect, but I caught every syllable. She remarked that I resembled the domestic staff who had mistakenly entered through the main entrance. And that precise instant, I understood this gathering would prove to be extraordinarily fascinating. My name is Gemma Holloway. I am 32 years of age, and I possess a confession to share. Throughout the preceding 14 months, I have been concealing something from the man I was prepared to wed. Not an insignificant secret such as consuming the final portion of dessert and attributing it to the household pet. Not a moderate secret like the reality that I continue sleeping with a plush toy from my childhood. No, my secret was that I earn $37,000 monthly. Prior to tax deductions, the figure is even more staggering. Following taxes, it remains the variety of number that causes financial professionals to examine their calculations twice and inquire whether an error has occurred. I serve as a principal software architect at one of the most prominent technology corporations in the Pacific Northwest. I have been composing code since I reached 15, marketed my inaugural application at 22, and have been ascending the professional hierarchy ever since. I possess 3 patents. I have delivered presentations at global conferences. I hold equity options that would make your vision blur. And Brennan believed I was a clerical assistant who struggled to manage her monthly rent. I never genuinely deceived him. When we encountered each other at a cafe 14 months prior, he inquired about my occupation, and I mentioned I worked in technology. He acknowledged this as though he comprehended, then questioned whether I coordinated schedules for the leadership team. I offered an ambiguous smile and referenced something vague about assisting the department. He constructed his own conclusions, and I simply never amended them. Why would I engage in such behavior? Why would I permit the man I was courting, the man I was developing deep feelings for, to assume I faced financial hardships when I could have purchased his automobile a dozen times over? Because I absorbed something long ago from the most significant individual in my existence. My grandmother nurtured me following my parents' passing when I was 7. She resided in a humble dwelling in a tranquil neighborhood, operated an aging vehicle, frequented ordinary markets, and never adorned herself with anything ostentatious. She instructed me in preparing modest dishes, in treasuring minor delights, and in never evaluating my significance by the figures in my financial accounts. What remained unknown to me until her departure, when I reached 24, was that my grandmother possessed a fortune of multiple millions. She had constructed a modest commercial empire during her younger years, allocated her resources prudently, and selected a simple existence because she held the conviction that integrity surpassed presentation. She bequeathed everything to me alongside a letter that I still preserve in my bedside drawer. Within that correspondence, she inscribed something I have never dismissed from memory. She expressed that an individual's genuine disposition only emerges when they assume nobody consequential is observing. When they presume you possess nothing to provide them, when they consider you beneath their acknowledgement, that is the moment you perceive their authentic nature. Thus, when Brennan extended an invitation to dine at his parents' residence, when he suggested this might be the evening, circumstances became significant. When he referenced that his mother maintained particular standards regarding initial encounters, I arrived at a determination. I would present the Ashworth household with the examination my grandmother had imparted to me. I would present myself as the modest, unassuming woman they anticipated. I would dress conservatively and operate my aging vehicle and communicate humbly regarding my situation. And I would observe. I would observe how they conducted themselves toward someone they presumed could not assist them, someone they presumed existed beneath them, someone they presumed had nothing to contribute. And before you assess me, before you conclude I was being calculating or misleading, permit me to pose a question to you. Have you ever pondered what your significant other's relatives genuinely perceive about you? Have you ever experienced that persistent intuition that the pleasantries are manufactured and the praise is vacant? Have you ever desired to comprehend the reality, even if it might cause pain? I desired to comprehend. I required comprehension because I was not merely contemplating matrimony with Brennan. I was contemplating joining his household. And households, as my grandmother also instructed me, endure perpetually. Now, before I proceed with this account, I simply want to pause briefly. If you are finding this engaging thus far, would you please activate that appreciation button and contribute a comment indicating your location and the current hour there? I genuinely enjoy examining those responses, witnessing individuals from across the globe connecting at various hours. It signifies more to me than you could understand. Very well. Returning to the narrative. The Ashworth property was precisely what I had anticipated, and somehow still succeeded in astonishing me with its extravagance. The entrance path alone extended longer than certain streets where I have resided. The barriers were fashioned from wrought iron with gilded embellishments because evidently standard iron was insufficiently pretentious. The grounds were maintained with the sort of exactitude that implied someone gauged each grass blade with a measuring instrument. As I navigated my 12-year-old Honda CR-V along that immaculate driveway, I glimpsed my reflection in the rearview mirror. Minimal cosmetics, hair secured in a modest twist, my grandmother's petite gold studs adorning my ears, the sole adornment I displayed. I appeared precisely like an individual who did not belong in this setting. Ideal. Brennan greeted me at the entrance with an embrace that seemed somewhat theatrical, as though he performed for spectators. His attention flickered toward my attire, my footwear, my absence of accessories, and I detected something in his countenance that had previously escaped my notice. Shame. He felt shame regarding my appearance. I catalogued that perception for subsequent consideration. Within, the residence stood as a monument to recent prosperity, desperately striving to emulate established wealth. Crystal fixtures descended from every ceiling. Oil compositions in ornate frames adorned the walls, though I observed they were reproductions rather than authentic pieces. The furnishings were costly but appeared uninviting, selected for visual impact rather than practicality. And positioned there, stationed in the entrance hall like royalty examining her domain, stood Cordelia Ashworth. She appeared in her early 60s, with the variety of countenance that had evidently encountered several exceptional physicians. Her auburn hair was arranged in a flawless formation that likely demanded commercial-grade fixative to preserve. Her garment was from a prestigious label, her accessories were authentic, and her expression of welcome was entirely completely fabricated. She presented her hand toward me as though bestowing an audience. I accepted it, and perceived the weakness, the rejection, the absolute absence of genuine feeling. Subsequently, she delivered that observation to Brennan, the comment regarding my resemblance to the service personnel, and I maintained my pleasant expression and feigned I had detected nothing. The evening was preparing to become exceedingly intriguing indeed. Had I comprehended what I was entering that evening, I might have donned protective gear rather than a sapphire dress. However, I have perpetually maintained that the finest protection is knowledge, and I had conducted my investigation. The Ashworth clan operated a network of automobile dealerships spanning 3 states, not the glamorous premium brands depicted in cinema, but respectable moderate-range vehicles that appealed to ordinary households. Brennan's father, Theodore, had acquired the enterprise from his own father and had devoted the preceding 3 decades to its expansion. Cordelia had married into the family at 23 and had promptly commenced ascending the social hierarchy with the resolve of a woman who understood precisely what she pursued. They had produced 2 offspring. Brennan, my intended, was 34 and served as a promotional director at a corporation entirely unrelated to the family enterprise. This was evidently a contentious matter with Theodore, who had anticipated his son assuming control of the dealerships. Subsequently, there was Rosalind, the elder sibling, who was 38 and regarded the family fortune as her individual treasury. I had uncovered all of this through accessible documents, social platforms, and several strategically positioned internet searches. I had examined photographs of extravagant celebrations, society functions, and philanthropic galas. I had perused publications regarding Cordelia's charitable activities, though closer examination revealed that the majority of her contributions accompanied substantial tax advantages and publicity prospects. None of this had equipped me for encountering Rosalind personally. She materialized 20 minutes beyond schedule, which I would subsequently discover was her characteristic approach. Creating an impression held greater importance than demonstrating consideration for others' schedules. She swept into the reception area wearing a garment that exceeded most individuals' monthly accommodation costs, with precious stones cascading from her ears and throat as though she had tumbled into a jewelry establishment and emerged draped in merchandise. Her salutation to me consisted of a solitary utterance delivered with the cordiality of a frozen specimen. "Greetings." "Not greetings. Delighted to make your acquaintance." "Not greetings. Brennan has shared considerable information about you." "Simply greetings," with a subtle elevation of the lip that implied she had perceived something disagreeable. I offered a pleasant response in return. She pivoted toward her mother and initiated a discussion that deliberately excluded me, addressing some charitable function, and whether the floral designer had been dismissed yet following the previous month's catastrophe. I remained there grasping the glass of water I had been provided, experiencing approximately as much welcome as a plant-based eater at a steakhouse. Brennan lingered nearby, appearing uncomfortable yet offering nothing. That constituted the second perception I catalogued. Theodore Ashworth represented an entirely different entity. He was a substantial gentleman, the variety who had likely been fit during his earlier years, but had subsequently yielded to the indulgences of affluence. He grasped my hand with a firmness intended to project authority, but merely conveyed fatigue. His gaze was penetrating, however, and I observed him examining me with something that might have constituted interest. There existed another attendee at this dinner, someone I had not anticipated, an elderly gentleman identified as Nathaniel Carrington, who was presented as a long-standing family acquaintance and commercial associate. He appeared in his late 60s with silvered hair and keen eyes that seemed to overlook nothing. When he accepted my hand, his attention lingered on my features, with a glimmer of familiarity that perplexed me. Did I recognize him? Had we crossed paths previously? I could not situate him, and he offered no clarification, but throughout the evening, I would detect him regarding me with that identical puzzled expression. Cordelia guided us toward the dining chamber, which was adorned as though someone had been allocated an unlimited allowance and no aesthetic sensibility. The surface was extensive enough to accommodate a royal feast. The seating was covered in what I presumed was genuine silk, and the place arrangements included more implements than I had ever witnessed outside a restaurant provision outlet. I enumerated them. There were 6 forks at each position, 6 for a singular meal. I have observed surgical procedures conducted with fewer instruments. Cordelia detected me examining the utensils and offered her smile. She supposed I was unaccustomed to formal dining, her tone saturated with manufactured concern. I responded that my grandmother consistently instructed me that the implements hold less significance than the companions with whom you share the occasion. Cordelia's expression contracted almost imperceptibly. Rosalind exhaled into her wine vessel, and the meal commenced. The initial serving was some variety of broth that I could not identify, but that likely exceeded my weekly provisions budget per portion. Cordelia utilized this opportunity to initiate what I would subsequently consider the examination. She inquired about my origins. I responded with a modest community in Oregon, which was accurate. She questioned regarding my relatives. I explained my grandmother had nurtured me, which was equally accurate. She asked what my parents had pursued. I indicated they had departed when I was young. Cordelia produced a sound intended to convey sympathy, but emerged resembling drainage clearing. She remarked how challenging that must have proven, maturing without appropriate direction. I stated my grandmother furnished all the direction I ever required. Rosalind inclined forward, her gemstones capturing the illumination from the overhead fixture. She inquired what my grandmother had pursued professionally. I responded she had been an entrepreneur. Rosalind's brows elevated slightly. She asked what variety of enterprise. I said modest ventures. Nothing particularly remarkable. The actuality, naturally, was that my grandmother had established a corporation that she ultimately transferred for multiple millions. But that variety of actuality would not serve my objective this evening. Cordelia advanced to the subsequent subject. She questioned regarding my present position. I indicated I functioned in technology. She asked whether I served as a secretary. I responded I occupied more of an assistant's capacity. Cordelia acknowledged knowingly, as though this verified everything she had previously concluded regarding me. She remarked it was pleasant that every collective required assistance personnel. Brennan adjusted uncomfortably in his seat, yet still contributed nothing. In that moment, Rosalind determined to introduce Genevieve. Genevieve. The designation descended into the discussion like a stone into placid water, transmitting undulations across the gathering. Rosalind uttered the name so nonchalantly as though she referenced the climate or the broth quality. She mentioned she had encountered Genevieve the previous week, that she was flourishing excellently, that her family's enterprise was prospering. I observed Brennan's countenance meticulously. Something flickered there, rapidly concealed. Culpability. Apprehension. It vanished before I could categorize it. Cordelia seized the thread with the enthusiasm of someone who had been anticipating this prospect. She remarked Genevieve had perpetually been such a delightful young woman, so accomplished, so excellently suited to their family's manner of existence. She had been Brennan's companion for 3 years. Was I aware of that? I indicated I was not. Cordelia offered her expression. She noted it was such a misfortune when they had separated. Everyone had anticipated they would ultimately unite. Genevieve's family possessed an importation company, specializing in premium automobiles, which would have constituted such an ideal complement for the Ashworth dealerships. The suggestion was evident. Genevieve had represented the appropriate selection. I did not. I surveyed the dining chamber and observed for the initial occasion that photographs adorned the partition behind me. I rotated slightly in my seating and perceived a collection of family instances, holidays, celebrations, commencements, and within at minimum 4 of those images, an attractive dark-haired woman positioned herself beside Brennan, her arm interlocked through his, her expression radiant. Genevieve. Cordelia tracked my attention and offered nothing, but her gratification was nearly tangible. Rosalind twisted the implement somewhat deeper. She mentioned Genevieve remained unattached. Actually, such an astonishment that nobody had secured her yet, almost as though she awaited something or someone. I returned to face the gathering and smiled. I remarked she sounded like a remarkable individual. This was evidently not the reaction Rosalind had anticipated. She blinked, momentarily displaced from equilibrium. Cordelia recovered initially. She confirmed yes, Genevieve was remarkable. And subsequently, with the delicacy of a construction implement, she appended that she trusted I would not experience excessive displacement in their environment, given my more humble circumstances. I inquired what she intended by humble. Cordelia's expression developed edges. She indicated she comprehended that not everyone arrived with particular advantages, that certain individuals were required to pursue ordinary occupations and exist ordinary existences, that there existed no disgrace in being ordinary. Ordinary. She had designated me ordinary. I perceived something shift within me, but I preserved my neutral expression. I had arrived this evening to discover the truth regarding these individuals, and the truth was becoming exceedingly evident indeed. Brennan finally contributed. He indicated his mother intended nothing by that she was merely being protective of him. Cordelia touched his hand, and stated of course she was protective. A mother perpetually desires the finest for her offspring. The unspoken conclusion suspended in the atmosphere like vapor, and you are not the finest. Theodore cleared his throat and endeavored to redirect the discussion. He inquired regarding my interests, whether I possessed any pursuits beyond employment. I indicated I appreciated reading, trekking, preparing modest meals, nothing elaborate. Rosalind expressed amusement and remarked that was endearing, like a youngster enumerating their preferred activities. Nathaniel, the family acquaintance, contributed for the initial occasion since we had been seated. He indicated he considered there was something to acknowledge regarding modest pleasures, that his own grandmother had existed a humble existence and proved the most content individual he had ever encountered. Cordelia directed toward him a glance that could have solidified dairy, Nathaniel disregarded her and continued regarding me with that peculiar, searching countenance. He inquired what my grandmother's designation had been. I responded Mildred Holloway. Nathaniel's brows elevated slightly, but he contributed nothing additional, merely acknowledged thoughtfully, and returned his concentration to his broth. The remainder of dinner proceeded in substantially the identical manner. Cordelia and Rosalind alternated posing inquiries constructed to remind me of my position, which in their perception existed somewhere considerably beneath them. Brennan periodically offered feeble efforts to advocate for me, but his conviction clearly was absent. Theodore maintained predominant silence, observing the proceedings with the exhausted acceptance of a gentleman who had discovered long previously that disputing with his spouse was futile. And throughout everything, Nathaniel observed me. By the moment the final course materialized, I had absorbed everything I required regarding the Ashworth household. They were elitists of the supreme classification, the variety who evaluated human significance in currency and social affiliations. They perceived me as an impediment requiring elimination, a difficulty requiring resolution, an error Brennan had committed that necessitated amendment. But I had additionally absorbed something different, something I had not anticipated. Brennan was not the gentleman I had presumed he was. The Brennan I had developed affection for was considerate and attentive, and appeared authentically intrigued by me as an individual. But this Brennan, the one who occupied his mother's gathering and permitted her to dismantle me without genuine objection, was someone different, someone weaker, someone who valued his family's endorsement more than advocating for the woman he professed to cherish. I pondered which represented the authentic Brennan I was preparing to discover. Following the final course, Cordelia declared we would have beverages in the sitting chamber. The gentlemen drifted toward the windows to deliberate commercial matters, while Rosalind excused herself to conduct a telephone conversation. Cordelia indicated she required consultation with the household manager regarding something, and would rejoin us momentarily. This left me solitary with my contemplations, and an ideal opportunity. I excused myself to locate the facilities. Brennan directed me toward the rear of the residence along an extended corridor, adorned with additional pretentious compositions. I proceeded slowly, absorbing the particulars. The dwelling was remarkable from a purely monetary perspective, but it perceived cold, vacant, like an exhibition space where nobody genuinely resided. The facilities were straightforward to locate, but I was not genuinely pursuing them. What I pursued was information, comprehension, some indication that would assist me in interpreting the evening. I discovered something considerably superior. As I proceeded past a partially ajar entrance, I detected voices, Cordelia's voice, and Rosalind's. I halted. Every instinct instructed me to continue proceeding, to honor their confidentiality, to not eavesdrop like a figure in a theatrical production. But something in Cordelia's manner made me hesitate, something acute, pressing. I advanced closer to the entrance, remaining in the obscurity. Cordelia was expressing that they needed to address this circumstance promptly, that Brennan could not be permitted to commit this error. Rosalind concurred. She indicated she could not accept he had actually escorted her here, that she had presumed this was merely a phase, comparable to his plant-based period during university. Cordelia responded this was more consequential than a dietary choice. This woman could devastate everything. I perceived my heart accelerating. They were discussing me. Naturally, they were discussing me. But what emerged subsequently was what genuinely chilled me. Rosalind indicated the timing could not prove more unfavorable. She expressed they required the consolidation with the Montclair family to proceed, and Brennan needed to be with Genevieve for that to transpire. Montclair. That was Genevieve's family designation, the premium automobile importers. Cordelia concurred. She indicated the dealership faced difficulties, that they required the Montclair collaboration to survive the approaching fiscal period. I perceived the foundation shift beneath me. The Ashworth dealerships were experiencing monetary difficulties. I had suspected something from my investigation, but this verified it. Rosalind continued. She indicated Brennan was supposed to maintain Genevieve's interest while they resolved the particulars. That was the arrangement. Genevieve's family would allocate resources to the dealerships, and in exchange, they would obtain access to the Ashworth distribution framework. Cordelia mentioned Brennan had assured her that he was maintaining his prospects accessible with Genevieve. Prospects accessible, while he was proposing to me. I supported myself against the partition, my thoughts accelerating. This was not merely snobbery. This was not merely a household that disapproved of their son's companion. This was calculated, strategic. Brennan was not merely a weak gentleman who could not oppose his mother. Brennan was exploiting me. But for what purpose? Why maintain me if Genevieve was perpetually the arrangement? Rosalind addressed my unspoken inquiry. She remarked Brennan was such an imbecile. He genuinely appeared to appreciate this minor secretary, this inconsequential person. He was supposed to utilize her as a temporary substitute until the arrangement with Genevieve was concluded. But he was developing attachment, a temporary substitute. That constituted my function, a diversion. Someone to occupy Brennan while the household resolved their commercial arrangements. Cordelia indicated they would manage it. She expressed they would declare the engagement this evening, secure Brennan publicly committed to this individual, and subsequently discover an approach to separate them prior to the ceremony. Once they had secured Genevieve, they would uncover some dreadful revelation about me that would justify terminating the engagement. Rosalind inquired what dreadful revelation. Cordelia responded they would fabricate one if required. I positioned myself in that corridor, motionless, attending to two women organizing the dissolution of my relationship as though they were organizing a social function. And subsequently, Rosalind expressed something that rendered everything additionally worse. She remarked at minimum the individual was excessively unintelligent to suspect anything, that Brennan had selected adequately in that aspect. She was credulous, trusting, likely merely appreciative that someone like Brennan had acknowledged her existence. Cordelia expressed amusement and concurred. I withdrew from the entrance, advancing silently along the corridor. My hands trembled, but not from injury, from fury. They presumed I was unintelligent. They presumed I was credulous. They presumed I was so desperate for affection that I would accept whatever remnants they provided. They possessed no comprehension of who they were confronting. I located the facilities, applied some cold water to my countenance, and regarded myself in the reflective surface. The woman returning my gaze was not shattered. She was not devastated. She was contemplating. I had arrived this evening to examine Brennan's household, and they had failed spectacularly. But the examination had disclosed something I had not anticipated. Brennan himself constituted part of the difficulty. He was not merely captured between me and his household. He was actively misleading me. The inquiry now was what to pursue regarding it. I could confront him. I could proceed out there immediately and inform everyone precisely what I had detected. I could create a spectacle, expose their arrangements, and depart this residence permanently. But that would prove too straightforward, too rapid. They would dismiss me as emotional, theatrical, resentful. They would convince themselves that I was merely demonstrating their assessment of me. If I was going to address this betrayal, I would accomplish it according to my approach, on my conditions, with an arrangement they would never anticipate. My grandmother had instructed me in numerous matters, but one instruction exceeded all others. She expressed that when someone underestimates you, they have presented you a gift, the gift of surprise. Cordelia and Rosalind had just presented me the most significant gift of all. They possessed no conception of what I was capable of accomplishing. I adjusted my cosmetics, arranged my hair, and returned to the sitting chamber with a pleasant expression on my countenance. The engagement was merely commencing. When I returned to the sitting chamber, something had altered. The furnishings had been repositioned slightly, the illumination modified. Cordelia was positioned by the hearth with an expression of scarcely concealed anticipation. Theodore had situated himself near the entryway, appearing uncomfortable. Rosalind was feigning examination of a composition, but I detected her glancing toward Brennan with a smirk. And Brennan was positioned in the center of the chamber, appearing nervous, excessively nervous. He pivoted when I entered, and his countenance transformed into what was intended as an affectionate expression. He advanced toward me, grasped my hands in his, and indicated he desired to inquire something of me. I perceived the trap enclosing around me. Brennan expressed that he recognized we had not been together extensively, and that his household could prove somewhat overwhelming initially, but he indicated he recognized what he desired. He indicated he desired me, and subsequently he descended to one knee. The band he produced was substantial and ostentatious, precisely the variety of item Cordelia would endorse. It was additionally, I observed immediately, of questionable craftsmanship. The gem was murky, the mounting uneven. It was the variety of band that appeared impressive in subdued illumination, but would disclose its imperfections in the severe light of day. Much like the gentleman presenting it, Brennan asked me to wed him. Behind him, Cordelia was radiating. This was evidently the arrangement, the initial phase in their strategy. Secure Brennan publicly committed to me, subsequently discover an approach to discard me subsequently. In the interim, they would utilize the engagement to maintain Genevieve waiting, suspending the promise of Brennan while they resolved their commercial arrangements. I comprehended all of this within the duration of a heartbeat. I additionally comprehended that I possessed a selection to execute. I could decline. I could reject this proposal from a gentleman who was exploiting me, before a household who despised me. I could depart with my dignity preserved, and never encounter any of them subsequently, but that would conclude the account prematurely. I contemplated what I had detected in the corridor. I contemplated their arrangements to fabricate some scandal regarding me. I contemplated how they perceived me as unintelligent, credulous, disposable. And I contemplated how gratifying it would prove to demonstrate to them precisely how mistaken they were. So I indicated yes. Brennan positioned the band on my finger, and Cordelia commenced applauding as though she attended a theatrical performance. Rosalind extended her congratulations with all the warmth of a January morning in the Northern Territories. Theodore grasped Brennan's hand and informed him he had performed admirably. Nathaniel captured my attention from across the chamber. There was something in his countenance, something knowing, like he suspected that this account possessed additional chapters remaining. I offered him a pleasant expression, and he returned it. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of celebratory beverages and fabricated congratulations. Cordelia discussed celebration planning. Rosalind deliberated venues. Theodore referenced commercial prospects that might emerge from the union of our households, though he faltered over this, evidently uncertain what my household could possibly contribute. Brennan remained proximate to me, performing the role of devoted intended with surprising conviction. Had I not detected what his mother and sibling had expressed, I might have accepted it. But I had detected, and I would never dismiss it. When the evening ultimately concluded, Brennan accompanied me to my vehicle. The evening atmosphere was cold and clear, and for an instant, we merely positioned there in the driveway regarding each other. He inquired whether I was well. He indicated he recognized his household could prove considerable, but he promised they would become receptive to me eventually. I indicated I comprehended. I indicated I was merely fatigued. He embraced me for the evening, and I departed from the Ashworth property with his band on my finger and an arrangement developing in my consciousness. The subsequent morning, I initiated my investigation. If there exists one matter my occupation has instructed me, it is the authority of information, data, documentation. I expend my days analyzing systems, identifying vulnerabilities, optimizing solutions. I was preparing to apply those identical abilities to the Ashworth household, and what I discovered over the subsequent days verified everything I had detected and substantially more. The Ashworth dealerships were certainly experiencing monetary difficulties, not merely a challenging period, but serious structural complications. They had expanded excessively rapidly during the prosperous years, assumed excessive debt, and presently the obligations were materializing. Their primary franchise agreement was approaching renewal, and the manufacturer was examining alternative options. The collaboration with Genevieve's household was not merely strategic, it was desperate, but that was not everything. As I investigated more deeply, I discovered something additional, something that the Ashworths likely presumed was concealed permanently. Rosalind had been misappropriating from the family enterprise. The quantities were modest initially, concealed in expenditure reports and incidental accounts, but over the years they had accumulated. Hundreds of thousands of dollars diverted to sustain her lifestyle while the corporation struggled. I reproduced everything I discovered: legal documents, financial statements, records of suspicious transactions, and subsequently I initiated making calls. My grandmother's designation still possessed influence in particular circles. The commercial contacts she had cultivated over decades remembered the Holloway family with esteem. When I reached out, they were content to converse. One of those contacts happened to know Nathaniel Carrington. And Nathaniel, it transpired, possessed his own history with the Ashworth household. They had deceived him in a commercial arrangement years previously. Nothing unlawful, merely sufficiently unethical to leave a bitter impression. He had been anticipating an opportunity to balance the account. I was preparing to provide him that opportunity. Before we proceed, I simply want to express something from my core. This platform signifies so much to me, and every single appreciation, every response, every subscription assists more than you could comprehend. If you are finding this account engaging, would you please consume merely 2 seconds to activate that subscription button? It genuinely creates a difference. Thank you. Now, returning to what transpired subsequently. The subsequent few weeks constituted an exercise in patience and performance. I performed the role of the content intended with the ability of an award-worthy actress. I attended family gatherings at the Ashworth property. I attended to Cordelia's passive-aggressive remarks with a pleasant expression. I observed Rosalind display her designer garments and costly accessories, comprehending precisely the source of the funds. And I observed Brennan. He was different presently. Or perhaps I was merely perceiving him clearly for the initial occasion. The attentiveness I had previously found appealing now appeared calculated. The compliments seemed rehearsed. And his telephone, which he protected with increasing vigilance, vibrated with communications that he rapidly concealed from view. I comprehended who was messaging him. I had observed the designation flash across his display more than once. Genevieve. One evening, I informed Brennan I was occupied late. Instead, I stationed near the establishment where he was supposedly meeting a client. He was not meeting a client. He was meeting her. I observed through the window as they occupied together at a corner surface, their heads positioned closely together, their manner unmistakably intimate. At one instance, he grasped her hand across the surface. At another, she expressed amusement at something he mentioned and touched his countenance. I captured images, not because I required evidence for any legal purpose, but because I desired to remember this instance. I desired to remember precisely who Brennan Ashworth genuinely was. He was not merely weak. He was not merely a parent-dependent individual. He was a deceiver and unfaithful, actively maintaining 2 relationships while his household orchestrated the outcome from behind the scenes. The fury I experienced in that instance was white-hot and purifying. But I did not act upon it. Not yet. Instead, I returned home and appended the images to my expanding file. Nathaniel and I had been convening regularly, perpetually in secrecy. He possessed his own documentation of the Ashworths' questionable commercial practices. He was acquainted with individuals who had been injured by their dealings over the years. He was more than willing to assist in bringing them down. But he inquired why. He indicated he comprehended his own motivations, but he desired to comprehend mine. Was this merely regarding revenge, or was it something additional? I contemplated his inquiry for an extended duration before I responded. I indicated it was not regarding revenge. It was regarding truth. I expressed the Ashworths had expended their existences, utilizing their wealth and position to manipulate individuals. They had regarded anyone they considered beneath them as disposable. They were raising Brennan to be identical, and they would continue doing it to others long after I had departed. I indicated someone needed to demonstrate to them that their wealth could not shield them from consequences. Nathaniel acknowledged slowly. He expressed my grandmother would be proud. That was the instance I comprehended I had executed the appropriate selection. The engagement celebration was established for 3 weeks subsequently. The Ashworths were hosting it at their property, inviting everyone who possessed significance in the commercial community. Cordelia was treating it like a coronation, an opportunity to display her perfect household to the world. She possessed no conception of what was approaching. I expended those 3 weeks preparing. I coordinated with Nathaniel. I executed strategic calls to industry contacts. I even reached out to the automobile manufacturer that was contemplating discontinuing the Ashworth dealerships. They were exceedingly interested in what I possessed to share. And subsequently, the evening preceding the celebration, I accomplished one final thing. I provided Brennan one ultimate chance to be truthful. We were occupying his residence, reviewing last-minute particulars for the celebration. I inquired casually how he felt regarding us, regarding our future. He indicated he was excited. He indicated he could not anticipate wedding me. I inquired whether there was anything he desired to disclose to me. Anything whatsoever. He regarded me with those azure eyes that I had previously found so appealing. He indicated there was nothing. He indicated I was everything he had ever desired. I inquired about Genevieve. His countenance went pale. He recovered rapidly, but I had observed the flash of fear in his eyes. He indicated Genevieve was merely a former acquaintance. Nothing additional. I acknowledged and indicated I comprehended. And in that instance, I did comprehend. I comprehended that Brennan would never disclose the truth to me. He would deceive me directly for as long as it served his purposes. He was his mother's offspring through and through. The subsequent evening, I adorned myself in a garment from my authentic collection. Not the modest sapphire number I had worn to that initial dinner. This was designer, elegant, worth more than everything Cordelia was wearing combined. I regarded myself in the reflective surface and smiled. It was time to demonstrate to the Ashworth household precisely who they had underestimated. The Ashworth property had been transformed for the engagement celebration. Ivory canopies dotted the manicured grounds. Crystal fixtures hung from temporary structures, casting prismatic illumination across the assembling crowd. A string ensemble performed tasteful classical compositions near the water feature. Attendants in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and appetizers that likely exceeded most individuals' hourly compensation proportion. Cordelia had exceeded herself. This was not merely a celebration. This was a declaration. I arrived in my customary Honda, observing the attendants' expressions as they attempted to reconcile my modest vehicle with the parade of luxury automobiles that had preceded me. One of them actually inquired whether I was with the catering service. I smiled and presented him my keys. The progression from the stationing area to the main canopy felt like a runway. With each step, I discarded the persona I had been wearing for the preceding 3 weeks. The nervous companion, the appreciative intended, the modest woman who should be grateful for Cordelia Ashworth's grudging acceptance. This evening, I was Gemma Holloway, the authentic one. My garment was a deep emerald green, custom fitted by a designer whose designation was whispered in fashion circles with reverence. My accessories were understated but unmistakable to anyone who recognized quality. My grandmother's diamond pendant hung at my throat, a piece that had been appraised at more than most automobiles cost. My timepiece was a limited edition that only 50 individuals globally possessed. I had expended the preceding 14 months concealing who I was. This evening, I would cease concealing. The initial individual to observe me was a woman I did not recognize. Someone's spouse or companion positioned near the entrance to the main canopy. She regarded me, did a double examination, and subsequently whispered something to her companion. They both stared. I continued proceeding. The second individual to observe was Theodore Ashworth. He was greeting guests near the beverage station, performing his duties as host with the fatigued enthusiasm of a gentleman who would rather be observing sports. When he perceived me, his welcoming expression froze in position. His attention traveled from my countenance to my garment to my accessories and returned again, and I observed confusion replace his practiced hospitality. I expressed good evening and thanked him for hosting such a lovely celebration. He stammered something regarding being pleased I could attend, his attention still attempting to resolve the puzzle I presented. I advanced before he could pose any inquiries. The main canopy was filled with perhaps 100 guests, a carefully curated collection of commercial associates, society figures, and family acquaintances. I recognized some countenances from my investigation: the regional manager from the automobile manufacturer, several competing dealership proprietors, a journalist from the local commerce publication. And positioned there, holding court near the champagne fountain, was Cordelia Ashworth. She was wearing a cream-colored gown that had likely cost a small fortune, though it was evidently off the rack despite her finest efforts to suggest otherwise. Her accessories were impressive by standard measures, but unremarkable by the standards of genuine wealth. She was expressing amusement at something one of her guests had mentioned, her head thrown back in that practiced manner that suggested she had learned to fabricate amusement at finishing institution. She had not observed me yet. I collected a vessel of champagne from a passing attendant and proceeded through the crowd, pausing to introduce myself to several guests along the way. Each interaction followed the identical pattern. Confusion at my appearance. Surprise when I referenced I was Brennan's intended. Renewed confusion when my garment, my accessories, my manner did not correspond with whatever they had been informed regarding me. Word was spreading. I could perceive it in the whispers, the sidelong glances, the telephones being subtly consulted as individuals attempted to determine who I genuinely was. Excellent. I ultimately reached Cordelia's circle, just as she was concluding an account regarding her recent charitable activities. She pivoted to greet the newcomer with her standard frozen expression, and subsequently, her countenance went through a remarkable transformation. Initial confusion, subsequently recognition, subsequently disbelief, subsequently something that might have been fear. She expressed my designation like an inquiry. I expressed good evening, Cordelia, and thanked her for organizing such a beautiful celebration. Her attention was moving rapidly, absorbing every particular of my appearance. The garment that exceeded her monthly household budget, the pendant that had been featured in a jewelry publication, the timepiece that she had likely never observed outside of an advertisement. She inquired where I had obtained these items, her voice carefully controlled but unable to conceal the tremor beneath. I indicated they were merely a few pieces I had been preserving for a special occasion. Rosalind appeared at her mother's side, summoned by some invisible distress signal. She regarded me, and her countenance went through the identical journey Cordelia's had. Confusion, recognition, disbelief. But Rosalind recovered more rapidly. She remarked the garment was interesting, her voice saturated with fabricated sweetness. She inquired whether it was a rental. I provided her the designer's designation. I indicated he was an acquaintance who had created it specifically for me. The designer's designation impacted Rosalind like a physical blow. This was someone who dressed celebrities, who possessed a waiting list years extensive, who did not create garments for clerical assistants who struggled to manage their rent. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing emerged. I excused myself to locate Brennan. As I departed, I detected Cordelia hiss something to Rosalind regarding discovering what was occurring. I detected Rosalind's confused response, indicating she possessed no conception that this did not make any sense. I smiled to myself and continued proceeding. The initial phase of the evening was complete. The seed of doubt had been planted. Presently, it was time to permit it to develop. Brennan located me before I located him. He emerged from a cluster of guests near the beverage station, his countenance pale and his attention wide. He had evidently detected the whispers, observed the glances, attempted to reconcile the woman positioned before him with the woman he presumed he comprehended. He inquired what was occurring. He inquired where I had obtained the garment, the accessories, the transformation. He inquired why I appeared like an entirely different individual. I indicated I appeared like myself. He stared at me, and I observed something shift behind his attention. Not comprehension exactly, more like the initial fracture in a partition that had been concealing an uncomfortable truth. He inquired whether we could converse privately. I indicated subsequently. I indicated this was our engagement celebration after all. We possessed guests to attend to. Before he could protest, I grasped his arm and directed him toward a group of commercial associates. These were the gentlemen and women who administered the automotive industry in our region, the individuals whose opinions genuinely mattered to the Ashworth dealership survival. They had been observing my entrance with undisguised curiosity. I introduced myself properly this occasion. I provided my complete designation, Gemma Holloway, and referenced my position at my corporation. I observed their countenances alter as they recognized the corporation designation. as they realized who I genuinely was. One of them, a silver-haired gentleman who administered a competing dealership chain, indicated he had heard of me. He indicated his nephew functioned in technology and had referenced my designation in connection with some innovative software solutions. I indicated that was exceedingly kind of him. Another guest, a woman who managed consolidations and acquisitions for a major investment firm, inquired whether I was related to Mildred Holloway. I indicated she was my grandmother. The woman's brows elevated. She indicated my grandmother had been a remarkable businesswoman. The Holloway designation still carried significant influence in particular financial circles. I could perceive Brennan tensing beside me. He possessed no conception what any of this signified. He had never inquired regarding my household beyond the most superficial questions. He had presumed humble meant inconsequential, and he had never bothered to investigate more deeply. His error. The evening continued, and with each conversation, the truth spread further. Individuals were conversing, consulting their telephones, verifying particulars. The narrative was shifting beneath the Ashworth's foundation, and they did not comprehend how to halt it. Nathaniel arrived approximately an hour into the celebration. He located me near the rose garden, momentarily solitary, while Brennan was drawn away by his father for some urgent discussion. Nathaniel indicated the manufacturer's representative was present. He indicated the gentleman had been exceedingly interested in the documentation Nathaniel had shared with him earlier in the week. I inquired whether he was prepared. Nathaniel indicated he had been prepared for years. We conversed for several additional minutes, finalizing the particulars of what would transpire subsequently. Subsequently, Nathaniel dissolved back into the crowd, and I returned to my role as the content intended. Cordelia located me subsequently. She had regained some of her composure, though I could perceive the strain around her attention. She drew me aside with a grip that was stronger than necessary and demanded to comprehend what I was pursuing. I inquired what she intended. She indicated I comprehended precisely what she intended. She indicated the garment, the accessories, the accounts I was sharing with individuals regarding my grandmother and my occupation. She indicated she desired to comprehend what my stratagem was. I indicated there was no stratagem. I indicated I was simply being myself. She indicated that was impossible. She indicated Brennan had informed her regarding my circumstances. She indicated I was a secretary who resided in a studio residence and operated a vehicle that belonged in a disposal facility. I indicated Brennan had constructed particular assumptions. I indicated I had never genuinely informed him those matters. Cordelia's countenance went exceedingly still. I indicated I functioned in technology, which was accurate. I indicated I possessed an assistance role, which was additionally accurate since architects assist the development teams. I indicated I had never claimed to be humble. I indicated I had simply never amended their assumptions. She inquired why. I regarded her directly. I indicated my grandmother instructed me that an individual's genuine disposition only emerges when they presume nobody consequential is observing. I indicated I desired to comprehend who the Ashworth household genuinely was. Cordelia's countenance drained of color. I indicated presently I comprehended. Before she could respond, the string ensemble ceased performing. Theodore Ashworth's voice emerged over the speaker system, declaring it was time for the official acknowledgments and addresses. Cordelia regarded me with something that might have been fear. I smiled and proceeded toward the stage. The main event was preparing to commence. The stage had been established at the distant end of the main canopy, decorated with flowers and soft illumination that was likely intended to be romantic, but instead felt like a spotlight awaiting its instance. Theodore positioned himself at the microphone, welcoming guests and thanking them for attending to celebrate this special occasion. He discussed family, tradition, the importance of strong collaborations in both commerce and existence. His attention kept darting toward Cordelia, who was proceeding through the crowd toward the stage with the determination of a general approaching a conflict. She reached the microphone just as Theodore was concluding his remarks. She assumed control smoothly, her composure firmly restored, her expression as frozen and perfect as ever. She indicated she was so pleased to welcome everyone to this celebration of her son's engagement. She indicated Brennan had discovered a wonderful young woman, someone who would prove a perfect addition to the Ashworth household. She indicated they possessed exciting arrangements for the future, arrangements that would ensure the Ashworth legacy continued for generations. Subsequently, she commenced hinting at commercial opportunities. She discussed growth and expansion. She discussed new collaborations and strategic alliances. She discussed the Ashworth dealerships entering an exciting new chapter. I observed the manufacturer's representative shift uncomfortably. I perceived Nathaniel capture his attention and acknowledge almost imperceptibly. Cordelia was constructing toward something. She was utilizing this engagement celebration as a platform for some variety of commercial declaration, likely related to the Montclair consolidation that was supposed to preserve their corporation. She summoned Brennan to the stage. He ascended the steps appearing nervous, though he was attempting to conceal it behind his practiced expression. He positioned himself beside his mother and regarded the crowd, searching for me. His countenance complicated. Cordelia indicated there was one additional individual who should be on this stage. She indicated she desired to welcome her future daughter-in-law, the woman who had captured her son's affection. She expressed my designation, and the crowd pivoted to regard me. I positioned my champagne vessel down and proceeded toward the stage. The canopy was silent except for my footsteps. Every attention was on me. The whispers had accomplished their function. Everyone comprehended that something was transpiring, that this engagement celebration was preparing to become something else entirely. I ascended the steps and positioned myself beside Brennan. He reached for my hand, but his grip was uncertain, questioning. Cordelia presented me the microphone with an expression that did not reach her attention. She indicated she was certain I desired to contribute a few observations. I regarded the microphone in my hand. I regarded Brennan. I regarded Cordelia, who presumed she was in control. I regarded the crowd, filled with individuals who could construct or demolish the Ashworth household's future. I indicated yes, I did desire to contribute a few observations. And subsequently I commenced speaking. I indicated I desired to thank Cordelia for the warm welcome she had provided me. I indicated I desired to acknowledge the Ashworth household for demonstrating to me precisely who they were over the preceding few weeks. Cordelia's expression flickered. I indicated when I initially arrived at this residence, I executed a determination. I determined to permit the Ashworths to perceive a modest version of me, a woman without costly garments or impressive credentials, a woman they might consider beneath their notice. The crowd was entirely silent. I indicated I desired to observe how they would regard someone they presumed could not assist them, someone they presumed possessed nothing to contribute, someone they presumed was, in Cordelia's terminology, ordinary. Cordelia's countenance went pale. I indicated what I had discovered was illuminating. I described the dinner where I had been compared unfavorably to my intended's former companion. I described the whispered insults Cordelia presumed I could not detect. I described being designated the service personnel, being designated ordinary, being designated a fortune seeker by individuals who comprehended nothing regarding me. Brennan was staring at me presently, his countenance a mask of horror. I indicated and subsequently I detected something I was not supposed to detect. I described the discussion in the study. I described Rosalind and Cordelia deliberating how to eliminate me from Brennan's existence. I described discovering that I was merely a temporary substitute, someone to occupy Brennan while the household arranged his genuine future with Genevieve Montclair. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I indicated I discovered that the Ashworth dealerships were experiencing serious monetary difficulties. I indicated I comprehended they were desperate for a consolidation with the Montclair family to survive. I indicated I discovered that Brennan had been maintaining his prospects accessible with Genevieve the entire duration we were together. I retrieved my telephone and displayed an image on the display. Brennan and Genevieve at the establishment, grasping hands across the surface. I indicated this was captured 2 weeks previously, while Brennan was supposedly occupied late. The crowd erupted in whispers. Brennan grasped my arm. He indicated this was not what it appeared. He indicated he could explain. I indicated he had already explained. I indicated I had provided him the opportunity to be truthful the evening before, and he had selected to deceive. I pivoted back to the crowd. I indicated there was additional. The canopy had become entirely silent again. Every individual in that crowd comprehended they were witnessing something unprecedented. The comfortable regulations of society events had been suspended. The masks were being removed. I indicated I had expended the preceding few weeks investigating the Ashworth family enterprise. I indicated I had discovered some interesting matters. I referenced the financial documents, the overextended credit, the declining transactions, the franchise agreement that was preparing to be terminated. Theodore Ashworth's countenance had gone gray. I indicated I had additionally discovered evidence of something more serious. I regarded directly at Rosalind, who was positioned near the rear of the canopy, frozen in position like a creature caught in illumination. I indicated Rosalind Ashworth had been misappropriating from the family corporation for years. I indicated the quantities had commenced modestly but had developed over time. I indicated the total was presently in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Rosalind's spouse pivoted to regard her with an expression of pure shock. Rosalind shouted that was a fabrication. She indicated I possessed no evidence. She indicated I was merely a resentful woman attempting to destroy their household. Nathaniel stepped forward from the crowd. He indicated he possessed evidence. He proceeded toward the stage carrying a folder that I comprehended contained years of documentation. Banking documents, expenditure reports, transaction histories. Everything required to demonstrate precisely what Rosalind had accomplished. He presented the folder to the manufacturer's representative, who had advanced closer to the stage with the appearance of a gentleman whose worst suspicions were being verified. Nathaniel indicated he had been anticipating an extended duration for this instance. He indicated the Ashworths had deceived him in a commercial arrangement 15 years previously, and he had never dismissed it. He indicated when Gemma had approached him with evidence of their current misdeeds, he had been content to contribute what he comprehended. Cordelia discovered her voice. She indicated this was outrageous. She indicated we possessed no authority to construct these accusations. She indicated she would pursue legal action against us for defamation. I indicated she was welcome to attempt. I indicated everything I had shared was documented and verifiable. I indicated the financial documents were accessible information available to anyone who comprehended where to investigate. I indicated the evidence of Rosalind's misappropriation had been compiled from sources that would withstand any legal proceeding. I regarded Brennan, who was still positioned beside me, appearing like a gentleman whose entire existence had collapsed. I indicated there was one additional matter. I reached up and eliminated the engagement band from my finger. The murky gem captured the illumination, disclosing all its imperfections. I indicated I would not be wedding Brennan Ashworth. I indicated I had never intended to. Not after I comprehended the truth regarding him and his household. I indicated the sole reason I had indicated yes to his proposal was to provide them sufficient opportunity to reveal themselves. I presented the band back to Brennan. I indicated he should provide it to Genevieve. I indicated she was evidently the one he genuinely desired. Brennan's countenance crumpled. He indicated that was not accurate. He indicated he possessed feelings for me. He indicated the matter with Genevieve was merely commerce, something his mother had arranged. I indicated that was precisely the difficulty. I indicated he had permitted his mother to arrange his existence, his relationships, his future. I indicated he had never once advocated for me when his household attacked me. I indicated he had deceived me directly regarding Genevieve, even when I provided him the opportunity to be truthful. I indicated a gentleman who could not be truthful with the woman he professed to cherish was not a gentleman I desired to wed. The crowd was absolutely silent. I pivoted to face them one final occasion. I indicated I was Gemma Holloway. I indicated I was a principal software architect who had constructed a career through diligent effort and integrity. I indicated I generated more currency monthly than most individuals generate annually, and I existed modestly because my grandmother had instructed me that wealth was not the measure of an individual's significance. I indicated the Ashworths had demonstrated to me their genuine disposition. They had disclosed themselves as individuals who evaluated others by their financial accounts and social position. They had regarded me with contempt because they presumed I possessed nothing to contribute. I indicated that was the variety of disposition that would eventually destroy them, with or without my assistance. I positioned the microphone down on the podium and departed the stage. The crowd separated for me like water. Nobody spoke. Nobody attempted to halt me. Behind me, I detected the chaos commence. I did not regard back as I proceeded through the canopy, but I could detect everything. Cordelia's voice, elevated and desperate, attempting to salvage the circumstance. She was indicating there had been a misunderstanding, that I was evidently disturbed, that none of what I had expressed was accurate, but the damage was accomplished. I could detect the manufacturer's representative speaking into his telephone, his voice clipped and professional. I could detect other guests murmuring, some already proceeding for the exits, desiring to distance themselves from the disaster unfolding before them. I reached the edge of the canopy and paused. Rosalind had cornered her spouse near the beverage station, attempting to explain, attempting to justify. His countenance was stone. He was regarding her like he had never perceived her previously, like the woman he had wed had been replaced by a stranger wearing her countenance. Theodore was slumped in a seat, his head in his hands. The patriarch of the Ashworth Empire, brought down by the exposure of secrets he had likely suspected, but never desired to acknowledge. And Brennan. Brennan was positioned alone on the stage, the rejected band still clutched in his hand. He was regarding me with an expression I could not quite interpret. Anger, grief, regret. It did not matter anymore. I departed from the canopy and into the cool evening atmosphere. The stars were bright overhead, indifferent to the human drama performing beneath them. I drew a deep breath, filling my lungs with atmosphere that perceived cleaner somehow. Lighter. Nathaniel located me by the fountain several minutes subsequently. He indicated it was accomplished. He indicated the manufacturer had already executed the communication. The Ashworth dealerships would forfeit their franchise agreement by the conclusion of the month. I inquired whether he perceived satisfaction. He indicated satisfaction was not precisely the appropriate terminology. He indicated it perceived more like relief, like an obligation that had finally been fulfilled. I comprehended what he intended. He inquired what I would pursue presently. I indicated I would return home. I indicated I would rest well for the initial occasion in weeks. I indicated I would wake tomorrow and continue constructing the existence I had created for myself, the existence that possessed nothing to do with Brennan Ashworth or his household. Nathaniel acknowledged. He indicated my grandmother would have been proud of me this evening. I perceived tears prick at my attention, unexpected and unwelcome. I indicated I hoped so. He presented me a professional card. He indicated if I ever required anything, I should contact him. He indicated he owed me one. I placed the card into my bag and thanked him. Subsequently, I proceeded to the attendant station, collected my aging Honda from an exceedingly confused attendant, and departed from the Ashworth property for the final occasion. In my rearview mirror, I could perceive guests streaming from the canopy, the celebration dissolving into chaos. I could perceive Cordelia gesturing wildly, still attempting to control a narrative that had slipped entirely beyond her grasp. I pivoted my attention back to the road and did not regard again. The drive home was quiet. I did not activate the audio. I did not contact anyone. I merely drove through the evening, permitting the distance to separate me from everything that had transpired. When I ultimately reached my modest residence, I occupied my vehicle for an extended instance before proceeding inside. I contemplated Brennan, the gentleman I had believed he was, and the gentleman he had proven to be. I contemplated how close I had approached to wedding him, to binding my existence to his, to becoming part of a household that would have regarded me with contempt perpetually. I contemplated my grandmother and the instruction she had imparted to me regarding disposition and significance. And I contemplated the future. My future. The one I would construct for myself on my own conditions, with individuals who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide them. I exited my vehicle and proceeded inside. My residence was modest and simple, precisely the manner I preferred it. I prepared myself a cup of tea, changed from my designer garment, and occupied myself by the window in my aged, comfortable robe. The city illumination sparkled below me. Thousands of existences performing in thousands of windows. I was merely one of them. Nothing special. Nothing extraordinary. And that was precisely how I desired it. 1 week subsequently, I was occupying my kitchen surface with my morning beverage when my telephone buzzed with a news notification. The headline read, "Ashworth Automotive, facing closure, after franchise termination. I perused the article slowly, absorbing the particulars. The manufacturer had officially concluded their collaboration with the Ashworth dealerships, citing concerns regarding financial management and ethical practices. Without the franchise agreement, the dealerships could not market new vehicles. Without new vehicle transactions, the enterprise could not survive. The article referenced that several former commercial partners had emerged with their own complaints regarding the Ashworth household's practices. It referenced that an internal investigation had disclosed financial irregularities that were presently being reviewed by authorities. It referenced that Rosalind Ashworth had been requested to withdraw from her position in the corporation pending further inquiry. It did not reference me. I had requested Nathaniel to maintain my designation excluded from it, and he had honored that request. The account would concern the Ashworths' own misdeeds, not the woman who had exposed them. I did not desire fame or recognition. I merely desired the truth to emerge. And it had. I concluded my beverage and surveyed my modest kitchen. The identical kitchen I had been occupying a month previously, when I had initially driven to the Ashworth property to encounter Brennan's household. The identical kitchen where I had executed the determination to examine them, to perceive who they genuinely were beneath their polished surface. So much had altered since then, and so much had remained precisely identical. My telephone buzzed again. This occasion it was a message from Brennan. He indicated he needed to perceive me. He indicated he could explain everything. He indicated